I stood barefoot in the hallway outside my home office, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it through the door. Trent's voice came through clearly as he whispered to my daughter Kelly inside my private space. "Just get her to sign the new will tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who thought he was completely safe from discovery. "I already added my name as primary beneficiary. She'll never know the difference." Kelly's nervous giggle made my blood run cold. "She'll sign anything when she's emotional about Dad. Grief makes people so easy to manipulate." My hands shook as I held my phone up to the crack in the door, recording every single word of their conspiracy. These were the people I had trusted most in the world after my husband Howard's death 6 months ago. My own daughter and the man she had married were plotting to steal everything Howard and I had built over 43 years of marriage. "She's so trusting," Trent continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Perfect victim for this kind of thing." Through the crack in the door, I watched Trent open the drawer containing my Real will, the document they planned to replace. Before I tell you how this nightmare began, I need one small favor from everyone watching this. Please write in the comments where you're watching from because I want to see how far this story travels. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button because what I'm about to share with you is something I never thought could happen in my own home. My name is Marilyn Cooper, and I'm 66 years old. For the past 6 months, I've been living as a widow after losing my beloved husband Howard to cancer. During that time, I thought my daughter Kelly and her husband Trent were helping me navigate my grief and the complicated legal matters that come with losing a spouse. I was wrong about the helping part. This is a story about trust, betrayal, and the kind of evil that hides behind a smile and family dinners. It's about discovering that the people who should protect you when you're most vulnerable are actually the ones planning to destroy everything you've worked for. What you're about to hear might sound unbelievable, but I have recordings, documents, and evidence for every single thing that happened. A loud thump came from inside the office, followed by Trent cursing under his breath. I pressed closer to the door, knowing that whatever they were doing in there would determine my future. The day Howard died, the world felt like it folded in on itself. We had been married for 43 years, and I honestly didn't know how to exist without him. The funeral was a blur of flowers, condolences, and people telling me how sorry they were for my loss. Kelly held my hand throughout the service, tears streaming down her face as we said goodbye to the man who had been the center of our family for so long. Trent stood beside her, offering quiet support and handling practical details that I was too devastated to manage. "Don't worry about anything, Marilyn," he told me after the burial. "Kelly and I will take care of everything while you focus on healing. You don't need to stress about paperwork or legal stuff right now." At the time, his offer felt like a blessing. Grief had made me feel completely lost, unable to concentrate on the mountain of documents and decisions that come with losing a spouse. I was grateful that my family wanted to help carry the burden. Now, 6 months later, I understood that when Trent said he would take care of everything, he literally meant everything I owned. The house, the savings accounts, the investments, the life insurance money, all of it. A month after Howard's funeral, Trent started making suggestions that seemed helpful at the time but now sounded completely different in my memory. He would visit every few days, always bringing coffee and kind words about how I was handling my grief. "You should really think about delegating some of your financial responsibilities," he said casually during one of these visits. "Managing all of Howard's accounts and investments is too much stress for someone in your situation." The word delegating had sounded so reasonable, so caring. I was struggling with basic tasks like grocery shopping and remembering to pay bills. Having someone help with the more complicated financial matters seemed like a logical solution. "I could help you set up some systems to make everything easier," Trent continued, his voice full of concern. "Power of attorney arrangements, automatic bill payments, simplified account management. Just to take the pressure off during this difficult time." I had nodded gratefully, touched by his thoughtfulness and willingness to help me navigate practical matters that felt overwhelming in my grief. Now I realized that delegating had been code for transferring control, and helping had meant positioning himself to steal everything Howard had left me. My phone buzzed with a bank alert. Attempted account access by Trent Wallace, access denied. The next morning I drove straight to Mr. Lyon's law office with my phone containing the recorded conversation from the night before. My hands were still shaking as I sat in his leather chair and played the audio of Trent and Kelly planning to forge my signature on fake will documents. Mr. Lyons listened to the entire recording twice, his expression growing more serious with each replay. He was a man in his 70s who had been practicing law for over 40 years, and I could see him processing the legal implications of what my family had been planning. "Mrs. Cooper," he said slowly when the recording ended, "this is attempted fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. These are serious criminal charges, not just family disagreements." I felt relief and terror at the same time. Relief that someone believed me and understood the gravity of what was happening. Terror about what this meant for my relationship with my only child. "We need to protect you immediately," Mr. Lyons continued. "But we also need to be strategic about how we handle this. Don't confront them directly yet. We need to gather more evidence and prepare proper legal protections." That afternoon, I revised my real will with provisions that Trent could never have imagined. Mr. Lyons suggested adding one special clause that would ensure justice if they continued their plan. The new will contained language that Mr. Lyons assured me was completely legal and absolutely bulletproof. The most important section was a clause specifically designed to address exactly what Trent and Kelly were attempting to do to me. Any attempt to manipulate, coerce, forge, or alter this will or any related documents will result in immediate and complete forfeiture of all inheritance rights, the clause stated clearly. This includes any family member or associate who participates in fraudulent activities related to this estate. Mr. Lyons explained that this type of protective language was becoming more common as elder abuse cases increased. The clause would ensure that anyone who tried to steal from me would end up with nothing, regardless of their family relationship. "The beauty of this provision," he said, "is that it's triggered by their actions, not your accusations. If they attempt fraud, they automatically disqualify themselves from any inheritance consideration." We also added detailed documentation requirements for any future changes to the will, making it impossible for anyone to forge modifications or claim that I had agreed to alterations while mentally incompetent. The revised will was notarized, witnessed, and filed with the court that same day. That evening, Trent sent me a text message that made my blood run cold. "Hi Marilyn. Kelly and I need to talk with you tomorrow about some important paperwork. We'll come by around noon." Trent arrived the next day carrying a tea service like he was visiting a beloved family member rather than attempting to commit fraud. He moved around my kitchen with familiarity, brewing my favorite chamomile blend, and arranging cookies on a plate with theatrical care. "Marilyn, you've been under so much stress since Howard passed," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Kelly and I have been talking about ways to take some of that pressure off your shoulders." He placed the steaming cup in front of me and settled into the chair across from my kitchen table. Then he produced a folder that I recognized as one of mine, though I was certain I had never given him access to my personal documents. "Let's just take some of this paperwork off your plate," he continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that looked official but somehow felt wrong. "These are just simplified versions of things you've already agreed to. Nothing complicated." The papers appeared to be will modifications and financial power of attorney forms, but the language was different from anything Mr. Lyons had prepared for me. Trent slid a pen across the table toward me with movements that seemed rehearsed, like he had practiced this exact moment. "Just sign where I've marked the lines," he said softly. "Then you won't have to worry about any of this legal stuff anymore." I picked up the pen with deliberately shaky hands, pretending to be more confused and fragile than I actually felt. The performance wasn't difficult since I was genuinely terrified, just not for the reasons Trent assumed. "Oh my," I said in a trembling voice. "I don't really understand what I'm signing. These forms look so complicated, and my mind hasn't been clear since Howard died." Trent leaned forward with what he probably thought was a reassuring smile. He gently took the pen from my hand and placed it between my fingers like I was a child learning to write. "You don't need to understand all the legal language," he whispered, his voice taking on the patronizing tone people use with elderly relatives they consider incompetent. "Just trust Kelly and me to handle the complicated stuff. We only want what's best for you." I nodded uncertainly and held the pen above the signature line. buying time while I figured out how to avoid actually signing anything without making him suspicious. This will make everything so much easier, he continued, his excitement barely contained beneath his concerned facade. But instead of signing, I deliberately let my hand shake more dramatically, making several false starts toward the paper. Trent's patience began wearing thin, and he sighed with obvious annoyance. "Kelly," he called toward the living room. "Can you come talk to your mother? She needs some encouragement." When Kelly entered the kitchen, I barely recognized the daughter I had raised for 28 years. Her eyes had changed, becoming cold and calculating in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Trent's expression when he thought no one was watching. "Mom, Trent is just trying to help you," she said, her voice carrying an edge of irritation that I had never heard her use with me before. "Stop being so dramatic about simple paperwork." The word dramatic hit me like a physical blow. I was being called dramatic for wanting to understand documents that would transfer control of my home and finances to people who had already proven they were willing to lie to me. "I just want to make sure I understand what I'm agreeing to," I said quietly, still pretending to be more confused than I actually was. Kelly rolled her eyes in a gesture that reminded me of her teenage years, but without the innocence that had made such behavior forgivable back then. "You're making this unnecessarily complicated," she continued. "Trent has experience with financial management, and you clearly don't. Just let him handle things so you can focus on your grief recovery." As she spoke, I accidentally on purpose knocked the papers to the floor, scattering them across the kitchen tile, and forcing both Kelly and Trent to scramble to collect them. While Trent gathered the scattered papers from the floor, he muttered under his breath in a voice that he clearly thought I couldn't hear. "She better sign these tonight, or we'll have to try a different approach." What he didn't notice was the small nanny cam I had positioned behind my bookshelf the previous evening, tucked between a few of Howard's favorite novels where it would be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Mr. Lyons had suggested documenting everything, and the camera was recording not just audio but video evidence of Trent's behavior, Kelly's manipulation tactics, and the fraudulent documents they were trying to get me to sign. As Trent organized the papers back into their original order, I noticed him slip one document into his jacket pocket, something I had never seen before, and that hadn't been part of the stack when he first opened the folder. The movement was quick and subtle, clearly practiced, suggesting that this wasn't the first time he had hidden documents from me during our meetings. Kelly was watching me rather than helping collect the papers, her expression calculating as she tried to determine whether my clumsiness had been accidental or deliberate. "Maybe we should try this again tomorrow," she said finally, "when you're feeling less overwhelmed." Trent shot her a sharp look that suggested this wasn't the timeline he had planned, but he nodded in agreement while pocketing whatever document he had taken. That night, I reviewed the security camera footage on my laptop, watching Trent's behavior frame by frame to see what he had stolen from my kitchen table. When I zoomed in on the moment he pocketed the document, I could just make out the header text. The paper was titled Beneficiary Reassignment Authorization, and appeared to be some kind of form that would transfer ownership of my accounts to someone other than Kelly. Based on what I could see of the document, Trent was planning to cut my daughter out of any inheritance entirely. The revelation was shocking even after everything else I had discovered. Not only was Trent planning to steal from me, but he was also planning to betray Kelly once he had what he wanted. She was being used as a tool in his scheme, not treated as a true partner. I realized that Kelly might not fully understand what Trent was planning. She thought they were working together to inherit my estate, but he was actually setting her up to receive nothing while he took everything. The next morning, I heard a soft knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Kelly standing on my front porch with another folder in her hands and a determined expression on her face. "Mom," she called through the door. "We need to try again. Trent says there are deadlines we have to meet." I opened the door and invited Kelly inside, maintaining my performance as a grief-stricken widow who was confused by complicated legal matters. She sat at the same kitchen table where yesterday's confrontation had occurred, placing a new folder in front of me. "I brought simpler forms this time," she said, her voice artificially bright. "These are much easier to understand, and you just need to sign in a couple of places." What she didn't know was that I had prepared my own paperwork the night before. Blank sheets that looked official but contained no actual legal language that could be used against me. Fine, I said with a sigh that suggested resignation rather than strategy. I'll sign whatever you think is best. I trust you to take care of me. Kelly's face lit up with relief and satisfaction as I reached for the pen. But instead of signing her documents, I slid my blank papers toward her and signed those instead, keeping my body positioned so she couldn't see exactly what I was writing. There, I said, pushing the signed blank paper toward her. Is that what you needed? Kelly glanced at the paper briefly, too excited by my apparent compliance to examine it carefully. All she saw was my signature on what appeared to be an official document. Perfect, Mom, she said, quickly gathering both sets of papers. You've made the right choice. As she walked toward the door, I could hear her and Trent celebrating in my hallway, their voices carrying through the house. Behind my closed office door, Trent's voice carried clearly as he and Kelly discussed their apparent victory over the confused old woman who had finally signed their fraudulent paperwork. See, I told you she was easy to handle, Trent said, his voice full of satisfaction and contempt. Older people get so overwhelmed by legal stuff that they'll sign anything just to make it go away. Kelly's laughter made my heart break, as I listened to my own daughter celebrate what she thought was successful manipulation of her grieving mother. We'll be set for life once she's gone, Kelly said, and the casual way she said once rather than when sent chills down my spine. They weren't just planning to inherit after my natural death. They were discussing my absence like it was a timeline they could control. The house alone is worth over $500,000, Trent replied, and that's not counting the investment accounts and life insurance money. Your mother has no idea how much she's actually worth. I stood frozen in my hallway, processing the fact that my daughter was actively planning for my death as a financial opportunity, rather than a family tragedy. That evening, I sent copies of all my recordings, security camera footage, and documentation to Mr. Lyons with a message that I was ready to take action to protect myself. Mr. Lyons called me back within an hour of receiving my evidence package, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach tighten with anxiety about what was coming next. Marilyn, based on what you've sent me, this situation is more dangerous than we initially realized, he said seriously. These recordings suggest they're not just planning financial fraud, they're discussing your death as a business opportunity. He explained that Kelly's comment about being set for life once she's gone, combined with their systematic attempts to gain control of my assets, created a pattern that law enforcement would take very seriously. Do not stay alone with them, he warned me. Keep acting like you don't know what's happening, but be extremely careful. We need to gather just a little more evidence before we involve the police. What kind of evidence? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. If they try to bring in a fake notary or attempt to forge your signature on official documents, that would give us everything we need for criminal charges, he explained. 2 days later, Trent called to schedule exactly what Mr. Lyons had predicted. Marilyn, we've arranged for a notary to come to your house tomorrow to make everything official. Just a quick formality to finalize the paperwork. The man who arrived at my door claiming to be a notary looked wrong from the moment I saw him. His clothes were rumpled, his briefcase appeared to be falling apart, and his notary stamp had obvious inconsistencies that anyone with legal experience would immediately recognize. Good afternoon, Ma'am Cooper, he said, emphasizing my name in a way that immediately triggered my suspicion. Howard used to joke that only scammers and telemarketers called me Ma'am Cooper, instead of Mrs. Cooper. Trent guided the fake notary to my kitchen table, where he began setting up what appeared to be official notarization materials. Kelly stood nearby, watching nervously as the man fumbled with documents that were obviously not legitimate legal papers. This won't take long, the fake notary said, avoiding eye contact while he organized his fraudulent materials. Just need to verify your identity and witness your signature on these estate modification documents. As he prepared his stamp, I noticed that the seal was crooked, the text was blurred, and the state identification information didn't match any official notary seal I had ever seen. I decided to test my suspicions with a simple question that any legitimate notary would be able to answer immediately. Excuse me, sir, I said politely. What state issued your notary seal? He froze completely, his face going pale as he realized he had no idea how to answer a basic question about his supposed credentials. The fake notary's silence stretched uncomfortably long as he tried to come up with an answer to my simple question about his credentials. Finally, he stammered out Ohio, but his uncertainty was obvious to everyone in the room. The problem was that we lived in Pennsylvania, and I had specifically asked which state had issued his seal because legitimate notaries are licensed by individual states and can only notarize documents within their jurisdiction. Trent's face turned the color of dust as he realized that his fake notary had just failed the most basic credibility test possible. Kelly looked confused, probably unsure whether this was a mistake or evidence that something criminal was happening. "I need to use the restroom for a moment," I said calmly, excusing myself from the kitchen. "Please make yourselves comfortable while I'm gone." Instead of going to the bathroom, I went to my bedroom and called 911 from my cell phone, speaking quietly so my voice wouldn't carry to the kitchen. "I need police assistance," I told the dispatcher. "There are people in my home attempting to commit fraud with fake legal documents and a fraudulent notary." The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way and advised me to stay calm and avoid confronting the suspects until help arrived. When I returned to the kitchen, Trent was whispering urgently to the fake notary while Kelly stood nearby looking increasingly uncomfortable with whatever was happening. 2 police officers arrived within 10 minutes of my call, their presence immediately transforming the atmosphere in my kitchen from criminal confidence to panic and chaos. The fake notary tried to run the moment he saw the officers, but he made it only as far as my front porch before being caught and handcuffed. His fraudulent notary materials were scattered across my lawn as evidence of the attempted crime. Trent's behavior shifted from panic to angry denial, as he tried to convince the officers that this was all a misunderstanding between family members. "This is just a family dispute about paperwork," he insisted. "Nothing criminal is happening here." Kelly began crying, though I couldn't tell whether her tears were from fear, guilt, or genuine surprise about how far Trent's scheme had progressed. I handed the officers my phone containing all the recordings I had made over the past several days, including the conversation where Trent and Kelly had discussed manipulating me, and the audio of them celebrating my anticipated death. "Ma'am, this is serious fraud," one of the officers told me after listening to just a few minutes of the recordings. What they were attempting could result in multiple felony charges. The officer took detailed statements from everyone present and collected the fake documents as evidence of attempted elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Trent was read his rights and informed that charges would likely be filed within 24 hours. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw doubt and genuine confusion in Kelly's eyes as she watched the police question Trent about his role in orchestrating the fraud attempt. "Trent, this was your idea, right?" she asked, her voice shaking as she began to understand that her husband had involved her in serious criminal activity. "The fake documents, the notary, all of it was your plan?" Trent stammered and tried to deflect responsibility, claiming that he had just been trying to help me manage my finances, and that the notary had been a legitimate professional he had hired through normal channels. But when Kelly pressed him for details about how he had found this legitimate notary, and why the man hadn't been able to answer basic questions about his credentials, Trent's story fell apart completely. "You told me Mom needed help with paperwork," Kelly said, backing away from him as the reality of the situation sank in. "You never said anything about forging documents or fake notaries." When Trent reached for her wrist to stop her from moving away, his grip was too hard and too controlling. Kelly pulled away from him with obvious alarm, probably recognizing something in his behavior that she had been ignoring or making excuses for. For the first time in months, my daughter looked at me with clear eyes and whispered, "Mom, I didn't know it was this bad." The sheriff called me the following afternoon with news that would finally give me peace of mind after months of fear and uncertainty about my safety and financial security. "Mrs. Cooper, we have enough evidence to charge Trent Wallace with multiple felonies," he informed me. "Attempted fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and using fraudulent documents with intent to commit theft." The evidence package I had provided, combined with the fake notary's confession and the fraudulent documents seized from my home, had created an overwhelming case that any prosecutor would be eager to pursue. Mr. Wallace is looking at potentially significant prison time if convicted, the sheriff continued. These types of elder abuse cases are taken very seriously by our courts. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. For the first time since Howard's death, I felt truly safe in my own home. What about my daughter? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Kelly appears to have been manipulated rather than being a willing participant, the sheriff replied. She's agreed to cooperate with the investigation and testify about how her husband convinced her to participate in activities she didn't fully understand. That evening, Kelly came to my house to tell me she was moving out of the home she had shared with Trent. I can't stay with someone who would do this to you, she said quietly. 3 days later, Trent showed up at my house in a rage, pounding on my door hard enough that I was afraid he might break the glass. His voice was loud enough for my neighbors to hear as he screamed accusations and threats. You ruined my life, you bitter old woman. He shouted, his voice carrying across the neighborhood. You set me up. You planned this whole thing to destroy me because you never liked me. I didn't open the door, didn't respond to his accusations, and didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his behavior was frightening me. Instead, I stayed calm and let my porch security camera record everything he was saying and doing. His rant continued for nearly 10 minutes, with threats about what he would do to get back at me and claims that I had manipulated Kelly against him through lies and emotional manipulation. This isn't over, he screamed as his final threat. You think you've won, but I'll find a way to make you pay for destroying my marriage and my life. The entire incident was being recorded in high-definition video and audio, providing additional evidence of his threatening behavior and complete lack of remorse for his criminal actions. In the distance, I could hear police sirens growing louder as someone in the neighborhood had obviously called to report the disturbance. The police arrived to find Trent still on my front porch, though he had stopped shouting when he heard the sirens approaching. His face showed a mixture of rage and panic as 2 officers approached him with handcuffs ready. Sir, you're under arrest for violating the restraining order and making terroristic threats, one of the officers announced as they placed him in custody for the second time in less than a week. Trent continued screaming even as he was being handcuffed, insisting that I had tricked him and that none of his actions had been criminal in nature. She's the one who should be arrested, he yelled as the officers guided him toward their patrol car. She recorded private conversations. She set me up. She manipulated her own daughter. But his protests fell on deaf ears. The officers had heard these kinds of claims before from people caught committing crimes against vulnerable adults, and they recognized desperation rather than legitimate grievance. As the police car pulled away with Trent in the back seat, Kelly arrived at my house in tears. She had been at work when Trent violated his restraining order, and she was horrified to learn that her husband had threatened me after promising the court he would stay away. Mom, I'm so sorry, she said, collapsing onto my front steps. I should have seen what kind of person he really was years ago. Kelly sat on my front steps crying harder than I had seen her cry since she was a small child. Her entire understanding of her marriage and her husband crumbling around her, as she processed everything that had happened. I didn't know about the fake notary, she said between sobs. I thought we were just helping you with complicated paperwork. I never realized he was planning to steal everything and cut me out too. I sat beside her, feeling the complicated mixture of anger and sympathy that comes from watching your child realize they had been manipulated by someone they trusted completely. Trent told me you were getting confused and making poor financial decisions, Kelly continued. He said we needed to help you before you lost everything Dad left you. I thought I was protecting you. The manipulation had been more sophisticated than I had realized. Trent hadn't just convinced Kelly to help him steal from me. He had convinced her that stealing from me was actually protecting me from my own incompetence. Can we fix this, Mom? She asked, looking at me with the same expression she had worn as a child when she had broken something precious and hoped it could be repaired. I looked at my daughter, seeing both the woman who had betrayed me and the child I had raised with unconditional love for 28 years. We can try, I said quietly. But trust takes time to rebuild, and there will have to be conditions. 2 weeks later, we sat in Mr. Lyon's office for the reading of my actual will, not the fraudulent documents Trent had tried to substitute, but the real legal instrument that Howard and I had created to protect our legacy. Kelly expected the worst, probably anticipating that she would be completely disinherited as punishment for her participation in Trent's scheme. Her hands shook as Mr. Lyons opened the official file. But the real will contain provisions that Howard had insisted upon years earlier. Protective measures designed to help Kelly rather than punish her for poor judgment in choosing a spouse. Kelly Cooper will inherit a substantial portion of the estate, Mr. Lyons read aloud, but only if she demonstrates financial independence and lives separately from Trent Wallace for a minimum of 1 full year. Kelly's eyes widened as she realized that her father had somehow anticipated this exact situation and built safeguards into his estate planning to protect her from financial predators. Howard added this clause during his final illness, I explained. He was worried that someone might try to use you to get to our money, and he wanted to make sure you had protection and time to make clear decisions. The will also included provisions for counseling support and financial education resources that would help Kelly rebuild her independence and learn to recognize manipulation tactics. Kelly looked at the document with something approaching wonder. Dad knew this might happen? Your father understood people better than he let on, I replied. He wanted to protect both of us. Kelly made the decision to accept the terms of Howard's will and begin the process of rebuilding her life independently. She entered therapy to process the manipulation she had experienced and moved into her own apartment for the first time since her marriage. Within a month, she had found a job and begun working again, rediscovering confidence and independence that I hadn't seen in her for years. The woman who returned was someone I recognized, my daughter, not Trent's puppet. I can't believe I let him control so much of my thinking, she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. Looking back, I can see how he isolated me from my friends and convinced me that you were the problem in our family. We started slowly rebuilding our relationship with clear boundaries and honest communication about what had happened and why. Kelly acknowledged the harm her actions had caused while working to understand how she had been manipulated into betraying her own mother. I want to earn your trust back, she said. Not just inherit it because I'm your daughter. The healing process was difficult and sometimes painful, but I could see genuine change in Kelly's behavior and decision-making as she worked to become the person she had been before Trent's influence. Some pieces of my daughter that Trent had stolen were slowly returning. Her sense of humor, her independence, her ability to think critically about situations rather than just accepting what someone told her. 6 months after Trent's arrest, I received the final court update about his criminal case. He had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison, with additional restitution requirements and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with Kelly or me. The fake notary had also been convicted and was facing his own prison sentence for participating in elder fraud schemes targeting multiple victims throughout the state. I sat at my kitchen table in the home that Howard and I had built together, finally feeling the peace that had been missing since his death. The house was secure, my finances were protected, and my relationship with Kelly was slowly healing. Howard, I whispered to the empty room, I handled it. Just like you knew I would. The estate planning protections he had insisted upon had saved both Kelly and me from total financial destruction, and his wisdom about human nature had proven more valuable than any inheritance amount. I looked directly at the security camera I had kept running throughout this entire ordeal, and spoke to everyone who might be watching this story unfold. Know your worth, I said clearly. Because people who try to take advantage of you only succeed when you stay quiet and don't fight back. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that wanting to protect what you've earned makes you selfish or paranoid. The quiet strength that Trent had mistaken for weakness had ultimately protected everything Howard and I had built together.